Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher.
Hi. So I was recently on vacation in France not that long ago, and it was very interesting, but this isn't about travel. It's rather about something interesting I saw there. So I visited a number of churches, in particular the Church of Saint-Eustache and the Church of Saint-Germain. And they're both just a little bit smaller than a cathedral, and not by very much. They're beautiful, beautiful churches. They're very, very interesting. One of them dates to about the 1200s, and that's the Church of Saint-Eustache, if I recall correctly. And the Church of Saint-Germain dated to like the 1000, roughly, maybe the 800s. Getting built over time, the original parish and so on, and then it got expanded and made bigger. But both of them had something interesting, because it seems like the stuff in France isn't real big on giving you detailed history on plaques, but you'll get like a little bit of history. At least occasionally they'll even include English, which is helpful because I don't speak French. My wife does, but I don't. And so something that was common to both, and actually true of other things that I saw too, but I'm especially interested in the churches, is that they were basically gutted during the French Revolution and then rebuilt afterwards. So in fact, many of the things that I saw in France were surprisingly young. In fact, and this is a little bit of a shock being an American, some of them were, a lot of the stuff that I saw was in fact younger than the older stuff you see here in America, which is strange because America is a relatively young nation in the configuration it is in now. But you can see things here in America that date from the 1700s. And in France, especially in the churches, surprising amount of stuff. The building, the skeleton dates very, very old. The stones are quite old. But, the artwork, a lot of that is actually surprisingly recent, and is sort of, done as much as possible in an original style. But in like the 1800s, the 1900s, recently in the 2000s, in fact, sculptures that were restored or rebuilt or replaced and so on. Now, the thing about the French Revolution was that the French Revolution was kind of virulently atheist. And they really wanted to eradicate Christianity. So the Church of Saint-Eustache, for example, was turned into a temple of agriculture. Because of course, you got a great building. Why would you throw that away? But they destroyed an enormous amount of art, and they kept it from being used as a church. And there's kind of an interesting, there's a lot that can be said about this, but there's one point in particular that I just sort of wanted to discuss, because you'll find an awful lot of atheists on the internet who will say like, oh, I'm not against it, I just lack a belief in it, variants on that. And I don't really care about that definition. I've done plenty of videos on that. It's more the apathetic aspect of it. I'm not against it. I'm especially not, angry at it. I don't want to destroy it. It's just not for me, and I just don't want to have anything to do with it. And here's the thing about that, even if it is true, and for a lot of people, apathy is pretty believable. A lot of human beings tend towards apathy, so that part is fairly believable, but here's the thing. People who are relatively apathetic don't tend to be the people in power. Now, you can in theory have, democracy, and so the will of the people, but, pay a little bit of attention to history. And in practice, the will of the people is channeled through the people who are actually given the responsibility of doing things. And the thing is, these people, whether they are elected or selected or what have you, but these leaders, they're not ordinary people, and they're not apathetic people. And so the big question that comes up here within the, I'm not against religion stuff, is it doesn't really matter whether or not you think it's worth going after, or you kind of would be happy to live and let live. What matters is, would you go and stop the people on your side who do think it's bad and do want to destroy it? Because it's the people who really care, the people who've got big plans and a lot of energy to implement them, are the people who actually go and volunteer to be those people in charge who are doing the work. And then there are a lot of people who will just do their job, whatever it is, even if that's smashing things. Well, if you're in the national police or the army or what have you, whoever is tasked to carry those out, those people mostly just want to get through life without too much. They're idealists, they're people who stand up for things, but by and large, as long as what you're doing is not too astonishingly atrocious, they'll just do what they have to get through their day, because especially in these things, not following orders can be very, very bad for you and often for your family too. So where are the checks on those people? Because if you look around, the people who really, really are animatedly atheist, they don't want to live and let live. They don't want to just get along. They want to eradicate Christianity. They want to eradicate all religions. And you can see this in things like, Soviet Russia, all sorts of Marxist states, which, like modern communist China sort of tolerates Christianity. Not by any means perfectly. Historically, it had been much, much worse. In the Soviet era, they had entire organizations dedicated, government-run, sponsored, run organizations to destroying Christianity, and went out of their way to do it, and killed enormous numbers of priests and brothers and nuns and so on, and destroyed enormous numbers of churches. There are people who want to do these things, and those are the people who want to be the leaders. Those are the people who are volunteering to be in power. And so, not particularly being in favor of being all that bad really means very little. In fact, basically nothing. Unless you're willing to go and stand in the way of those people on your side and keep them from doing the things that they want to do. And if you don't really care that much, you probably don't care enough to stand up for it. So it doesn't matter at all that you don't personally want to do the bad things. If the atheist side ever gets power, those bad things will be done by those people who are very, very motivated. And the much larger number of people who don't really care will sort of implicitly, they will be giving them the power to do it, and they're not going to stand in the way of the power being used that way. And that's the thing. That's how all human history goes, if you look at it. As far back as we have history, there are the people who use the power, and then there is the general, in older times, agricultural base who provided the manpower, who mostly just wanted to live and get along with their immediate neighbors and just get through the day. But nonetheless, they provided the power. They were the engine for the people who did things. And sometimes people stood up to them, and a lot of times they didn't. So the question is not, what would you do if you were in charge? The question is, what would the people you're going to put in charge do? That's what really matters. That's all, in fact, that really matters. So when it comes down to, I just want to get along, I just want to be left alone, fine. Who are you going to put in power, though? And if it's somebody dangerous, you're just as dangerous as the person you're going to put in power. Now, this does, of course, obviously cut all sorts of directions, because the people Christians put in power themselves don't just want to blandly live and let live, though Christianity is historically one of the more tolerant of the religions, depending exactly on it's one of the more historically tolerant of things fairly different from it. There's a lot of historical dependency, on that. And it varies a lot with the time and place. Something, if you actually study the history, by the way, by and large, religious persecution is done by the secular authorities, at least in places where there is that distinction to be made. Christianity makes that secular religious distinction. Not all places do. Like Islam doesn't really make a secular religious distinction, for example. But in any event, so this does cut all ways. And I'm not saying that atheists should be perfectly happy living in a Christian country, though... frankly, if you look at the atheist ones, you seem better off in a Christian country. The really atheist ones, the officially atheist, the we hate religion, we're atheist, there is no God, definitely countries. That's things like the Soviet Union. And, other places, kind of something. There were lots of countries that had a very similar sort of thing. So, anyhow, so I'm not saying that this is entirely one-sided. Everyone needs to look at who would people put in power, whether implicitly or explicitly. It doesn't even matter really that you would vote for them if you even had a democracy, if you would still support the sort of government where most people would in fact vote for those people. So that's the correct way to look at this stuff. Doesn't matter what you would prefer if you were some sort of emperor, because you're not going to be. If you don't particularly care, especially, you're never going to be any sort of emperor. Or king, or, president or what have you, people don't go and pick somebody who doesn't really care for that job. They pick people who care. They pick people who make promises. They pick people who they look up to for some reason or other, not people who just want to get through the day. And so you have to look at them. Who will you put in power is the real question to ask for everybody. And so your own personal tolerance or lack thereof doesn't matter. So who would you put in power? So that's just something that really struck home, given how much destruction of beauty and good things was done by the French Revolution, and the people in it who hated religion and wanted to eradicate it from the face of the earth. They destroyed a lot of other beautiful things too, but they were especially destructive of beautiful things in the church. And so, yeah, it's one of the things that struck me most when I was there, curiously enough, is it was quite a testament to how much destruction people will wreak. Yeah. Anyway, until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.